Emily stared at the compressed sawdust brick in her hand, then at the empty woodpile, then at Sophia's blue-tinged lips. 3 logs left. 3. The storekeeper had laughed when she'd asked about firewood prices. $16 a cord, widow. You got that kind of money? She didn't. $43 total. Winter 8 weeks away. Jonas Linkfist's final warning still echoed. You will freeze here. That baby will freeze with you. The brick felt impossibly heavy. Everyone said sawdust exploded. Everyone said it would kill her. But the Finnish man who built this cabin had left thousands of these in the loft. He'd known something. Emily fed the brick into the stove and struck the match. This was either salvation or suicide. Before we continue Emily's story, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and stay with us until the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's see if Emily and baby Sophia can survive what's coming. Emily Andersson had been a widow for 7 months when she stepped off the stagecoach in Bitter Creek Valley with nothing but a canvas bag, a baby, and a deed to a cabin she'd never seen. The land agent in Minneapolis had shown her a photograph. A sturdy log structure with a stone chimney, he'd said, built by a Finnish gentleman of excellent character. The price was $60. She'd paid it with money from selling her late husband's pocket watch. The reality was different. The cabin stood at the end of a rutted track, 2 miles from the nearest neighbor. The logs were sound enough, chinked with moss and clay, but the inside was bare. A rope bed frame, a cast iron stove with a cracked door, a single shelf. That was all. No table, no chairs, no woodpile. Ma'am, you sure about this? The stagecoach driver had asked her twice. Winter comes hard here. October, sometimes September. Emily had nodded. She had nowhere else to go. That had been 3 weeks ago. Now it was the 20th of August, and she was counting days. She laid Sophia in the rope bed, tucking the thin blanket around her daughter's small body. The baby fussed, her cheeks red from the already cooling air. Emily straightened and looked around the cabin. 16 feet by 16 feet. 1 window with real glass. A loft accessible by a ladder. The stove. Everything depended on the stove. She had spent the first week gathering deadfall from the forest edge. Branches, twigs, anything dry enough to burn. It made a pile outside the door that looked substantial until Jonas Linkfist came to visit. He'd appeared on her 4th day, a man of maybe 50, with a face carved by wind and a voice that didn't waste words. He'd looked at her woodpile for a long time before speaking. That won't get you through October, he'd said. Emily had straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt. I'll gather more. Deadfall burns fast. You need 4 cords of seasoned wood, split and stacked. That's minimum for a cabin this size. How much does seasoned wood cost? $16 a cord if you can find anyone willing to haul it out here this late in the season. $64. She had 43. I'll make do, Emily had said. Jonas had shaken his head. You got a baby. Making do isn't enough. He'd walked away then, and Emily had returned to gathering sticks. But Jonas came back. He came back 3 times in 2 weeks, each time with the same message delivered in different words. Leave. Come to his cabin. Bring the baby. Don't try to winter here alone. The last time, he'd brought his wife. Marta Linkfist was a small woman with strong hands and eyes that missed nothing. She'd held Sophia while Emily split kindling, and when she handed the baby back, she'd spoken quietly. Jonas is right. This is not stubbornness you need. This is wood you need, and you don't have it. I'll find a way, Emily had said. What way? Emily hadn't answered. Marta had touched her arm. We have room, you and the baby, until spring. I paid for this cabin. That money is gone. Your life doesn't have to be. Emily had thanked them and said no. She'd said no because the cabin was the only thing she owned in the world. She'd said no because accepting charity meant admitting she'd made a mistake buying it. She'd said no because she didn't know how to be anything except stubborn anymore. The Linkfists had left, and Emily had climbed into the loft to see what she was working with. The loft was darker than the main room, the single small window letting in enough light to see shapes, but not details. Emily had expected it to be empty, like everything else in the cabin. Instead, she'd found stacks, rows and rows of rectangular objects, each about the size of a brick, wrapped in burlap and bound with twine. They filled the entire loft space, stacked 4 feet high in places. Emily had pulled one free and brought it down into the light. It was heavy, maybe 8 pounds. The burlap wrapping was old but intact. She'd cut the twine and unfolded the cloth. Compressed sawdust, bound together with something dark and sticky. Pine pitch, she'd realized. The brick held its shape perfectly, the sawdust packed so tightly it felt almost like wood itself. She'd counted 60 bricks in one stack. Then she'd counted the stacks. 24 stacks visible from the ladder. More deeper in the loft that she couldn't reach without crawling. Thousands of bricks, maybe 10 tons of compressed sawdust. Emily had sat on the cabin floor with a brick in her hands and tried to understand. The Finnish man who'd built the cabin, Olaf Mikkelsen, the land agent had called him, had spent God knew how long making these. Gathering sawdust, mixing it with pitch, compressing it, wrapping it, storing it. Why? She'd turned the brick over in her hands. It was solid, dense. If it burned... But sawdust didn't burn. Everyone knew that. Sawdust smothered fires. That's why sawmills kept water barrels nearby, to drench the piles before they could combust and cause explosions. Unless compression changed something. Unless the pitch acted as a binder and a fuel. Unless Olaf Mikkelsen had known something everyone else didn't. Emily had carried the brick to the stove. She'd built a small fire of kindling and deadfall, let it catch properly, then placed the brick on top of the flames. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. The brick sat there, the burlap wrapper charring black. Emily had started to pull it back out when the pitch caught. The fire had roared. The brick burned hotter than any wood she'd ever used. The flames were bright and steady, the heat intense and immediate. She'd held her hand near the stove and felt warmth that penetrated deep. The cabin temperature rose 10 degrees in 20 minutes. The brick burned for 45 minutes before crumbling to fine ash. Emily had stood there, watching the fire, her mind working through calculations. If one brick burned for 45 minutes, she needed 32 bricks per day to keep the fire going continuously. 32 bricks times 90 days of winter, 2,800 bricks. She had thousands. She might actually survive. The next morning, she'd walked to Jonas Linkfist's cabin to tell him she was staying. She'd found him outside, splitting wood with the kind of rhythm that came from decades of practice. "I'm not leaving," she'd said. Jonas had set down his axe. "You find money for firewood?" "I found something better." She'd told him about the bricks, about the test, about the heat they produced. Jonas had listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he'd said one word. "Show me." They'd walked back to Emily's cabin together. She demonstrated the brick, building another test fire. Jonas had watched it burn, his hand held near the stove to gauge the heat. When the brick crumbled to ash, he turned to her. "That's not wood," he'd said. "No, it's better than wood. Sawdust explodes." This sawdust is compressed, with pitch. It's different. Jonas had been quiet for a long time. Then, Olaf made these? They were in the loft, hundreds of them. Olaf was a strange man, kept to himself, talked to almost no one. When he left, folks figured he'd gone crazy from the isolation. Maybe he was smarter than everyone thought. Jonas had shaken his head. Or maybe he was crazy, and you're about to burn your cabin down. Sawdust doesn't burn steady. It flares. It sends sparks. That stove door is already cracked. You get a flare-up, the whole cabin goes. It burns steady for 45 minutes. Once. You've tested it once. I've tested it 3 times now. Same result. Jonas had looked at her hard. You're risking your baby's life on sawdust bricks made by a crazy Finn. I'm risking my baby's life on what I have, which is sawdust bricks. I'm telling you it's dangerous. And I'm telling you I'm staying. Jonas had left without another word. Emily had watched him go, her hands clenched at her sides. She'd expected him to understand. She'd expected him to see the possibility. Instead, he'd seen danger. Maybe he was right. Maybe the bricks would fail. Maybe they'd flare and spark and burn the cabin down. Maybe she was crazy. But she was also desperate, and desperation made different calculations than caution. She'd spent the next week burning bricks exclusively, monitoring the stove constantly, adjusting the damper, learning the rhythm of the fuel. The bricks burned hot and clean. The ash was fine, almost powder. The heat was consistent. She burned through 40 bricks, and the cabin stayed warm and intact. On September 1st, the temperature dropped 20 degrees overnight. Emily woke to frost on the window glass, and Sophia crying from the cold. She'd fed 3 bricks into the stove in quick succession, and the cabin had warmed within the hour. On September 5th, Thomas Renner came. Thomas ran the general store in town, 8 miles away. He was a thin man with a merchant's smile and a reputation for knowing everyone's business. He arrived mid-morning, driving a wagon loaded with supplies. "Heard you still here," he'd said, climbing down. "Thought I'd check if you needed anything before winter." Emily had invited him in. She'd made coffee, real coffee, one of her few luxuries, and they'd sat at the packing crate she used as a table. "Jonas tells me you're burning sawdust," Thomas had said after his second cup. "Compressed sawdust bricks, mixed with pitch. Jonas says it's dangerous." Jonas is cautious. Jonas has survived 11 winters in this valley. How many have you survived? Emily had set down her cup. "This is my first, but I'm going to survive it." Thomas had smiled. "Confidence is good, but confidence doesn't keep you warm. Wood keeps you warm, and you don't have wood." "I have bricks." "Sawdust bricks." "Yes." Thomas had leaned back, his smile fading. "I've been in this territory 20 years. I've seen people try all kinds of things to make it through winter. Burning corn cobs, burning dried dung, burning furniture when the wood ran out. You know what they all had in common?" "What?" "They bought wood from me the next season, if they survived." Emily had felt her jaw tighten. "The bricks work." "For how long? A week? 2 weeks? What happens when they start flaring? What happens when the pitch builds up in your chimney and catches fire? What happens when your stove cracks from the heat and burning sawdust spills across your floor?" "That won't happen. You don't know that." "I know the bricks burn clean and hot. I know they've kept this cabin warm for a week. I know I have enough to last all winter." Thomas had stood. "I'm not trying to scare you, Mrs. Andersson. I'm trying to save your life. Sawdust doesn't burn. It smothers. It chokes. What you're doing is madness." "Then I'm mad." Thomas had walked to the door, then stopped. "I'll be back in October. If you're still alive, We'll talk about wood for next year." He'd left. Emily had sat alone in her warm cabin, listening to Sophia breathe, feeling the steady heat from the stove. Thomas's words echoed in her mind. Madness, choking, flares, chimney fires. But the cabin was warm, and she was still alive. The first snow came on September 18th. Not much, just a dusting that melted by noon, but enough to make Emily's decision final. She wasn't leaving. She was burning the bricks. Whatever happened next, happened. She'd developed a routine by then. Feed the stove every 40 minutes. Check the chimney every morning for buildup. Keep the ash bucket emptied. Monitor Sophia constantly for signs of cold. Sleep in shifts, never more than 2 hours at a time. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. It was working. On October 3rd, Jonas came back. He didn't knock. He just opened the door and walked in, bringing cold air and the smell of coming winter. Emily was nursing Sophia by the stove. She looked up but didn't speak. Jonas had looked around the cabin, at the stove burning steadily, at the neat stack of bricks by the hearth, at Emily and the baby, both clearly healthy and warm. "Still alive," he'd said. "Still alive." "How many bricks have you burned?" 208. "And the cabin hasn't caught fire?" "No." Jonas had walked to the stove, held his hand near it, gauged the heat. Then he'd turned to Emily. "Show me how you make them work." Emily had felt something release in her chest. Not relief, not quite, but something close. She'd shown him everything. How to position the brick for maximum burn. How to adjust the damper for the compressed fuel. How to recognize when the pitch was catching versus when the sawdust was catching. How to clean the stove to prevent buildup. Jonas had listened. Really listened. And when she finished, he'd nodded slowly. "Olaf knew what he was doing," he'd said. "Yes." "You're taking a hell of a risk." "I know." "But you might survive." "I will survive." Jonas had almost smiled. "You're stubborn as frozen ground." "I learned from the best." He'd left her with a promise to check back in 2 weeks. Emily had returned to a routine, feeding the stove, watching the bricks burn, counting the days until spring. But 3 days later, the temperature dropped to 42 below zero. Emily woke to Sophia's screaming. The baby's face was red, her tiny fists clenched, her body shaking. Emily grabbed her, pulled her close, felt the terrifying cold of the cabin air. The stove was still burning, but the heat couldn't keep up with the dropping temperature. Emily fed in 3 bricks at once, praying they wouldn't flare, praying the stove could handle it. The bricks caught. The fire roared. The heat built, but slowly. So slowly. Sophia wouldn't stop crying. Emily wrapped her in every blanket she had. She held her against her own body. She sang to her. She prayed. The baby's cries weakened to whimpers. Her skin felt too cold. The cabin temperature was dropping. 30 degrees, 25, 20. Emily fed more bricks. 4, 5. The stove glowed red hot. The metal groaned. But the temperature kept falling. This was it. This was the moment Thomas had warned her about. The moment when the bricks wouldn't be enough. When the cold would win. Emily looked down at Sophia's pale face and made a decision. She grabbed the rope bed, dragged it directly in front of the stove, so close the wood frame would scorch, and climbed in with Sophia. She wrapped them both in every piece of fabric she owned. She fed the stove until it could hold no more fuel. And she waited. The cold pressed in from every side. The wind howled. The cabin walls creaked. But the stove burned. For 6 hours, Emily didn't move. She held Sophia. She fed the stove. She watched the metal glow and prayed it wouldn't crack. The temperature in the cabin stabilized at 18 degrees. Sophia stopped whimpering. Her color returned. She slept. Emily stayed awake, feeding bricks, watching the fire, feeling the terrible mathematics of survival. She was burning through fuel at 4 times her normal rate. At this pace, she'd run out by January. But Sophia was alive. The cabin was holding. The bricks were working. When dawn came and the temperature outside finally started to rise, Emily allowed herself to sleep for 20 minutes. When she woke, the cabin was 30 degrees inside. The stove was still burning. Sophia was breathing steady and warm. They'd survived the night. But Emily knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning. Winter hadn't even truly started yet. The morning after the 42 below night, Emily counted her remaining bricks. She'd burned 63 in a single night. 63. At that rate, she had 40 days of fuel left. Maybe 50 if she let the cabin get colder. Sophia deserved better than cold. Emily was heating water for coffee when Jonas knocked. She opened the door to find him holding a burlap sack. "You made it," he said. It wasn't the question. "Barely." Jonas stepped inside, his eyes going immediately to the stove. It was still glowing from the night's burn, the metal tinged with heat stress. He set the sack on the floor. Potatoes, Emily realized, and walked to the hearth. "You burned how many last night?" 63 bricks. Jonas whistled low. "That's suicide fuel consumption." "It was 42 below. What was I supposed to do?" "Come to my cabin like I told you 6 times. Emily picked up Sophia, who was starting to fuss. "I stayed. We survived." This time, Jonas crouched by the stove, examining the metal. "Look at this. You're warping the iron. Another night like that, and this whole thing cracks open." "Then I'll pray for warmer weather." Jonas stood, his face hard. "You can't pray away winter. It's October 12th. You've got 5 months ahead of you, maybe 6, and you just burned 3 days of fuel in one night." Emily felt her throat tighten. "I know my mathematics." "Do you?" "Because I've done mine. You started with what, 3,000 bricks?" "Roughly." "You've burned through 400 already. At normal consumption, you'd make it to March. At last night's rate, you're dead by Christmas." The word hung between them like smoke. "I'll ration better," Emily said. "There's no rationing cold. It comes whether you're ready or not." Jonas moved to the door, then stopped. "Marta wants to visit. She's got questions about the bricks." "She's welcome any time." "She thinks you might be onto something. I think you're killing yourself slowly." Jonas pulled open the door. "I'll be back in 3 days. If you're frozen, I'm taking the baby." He left. Emily stood holding Sophia, listening to the wind pick up outside, feeling the cabin's warmth against her back and the vast cold beyond the walls. 3 days. She could stay warm for 3 days. After that, she'd worry about the next 3. But the cold had other plans. That afternoon, the temperature dropped again. Not as severe as the night before, but steady. By evening, it was 20 below and falling. Emily burned bricks at double her normal rate and kept the cabin at 40 degrees. Sophia cried from the chill. Emily wrapped her in every soft thing she owned and held her close to the stove. At midnight, someone pounded on the door. Emily jerked awake, her heart hammering. Sophia was asleep against her chest. The pounding came again, urgent and hard. "Mrs. Andersson, open up!" Thomas Renner's voice. Emily laid Sophia in the bed and opened the door. Thomas stood in the darkness, his face red with cold, his horse stamping behind him. "You need to come with me, now," he said. "What's happened?" The valley's talking. Jonas told people about your sawdust bricks. Now half the town thinks you're a witch, and the other half thinks you're a fool. Thomas stepped closer. There's men coming tomorrow. They want to see for themselves. Emily's stomach dropped. What men? Harold Gunnarsson and his boys. They heard you're surviving without buying wood, and they think you're lying. Harold's got money in the timber business. If people stop buying firewood because some widow's burning sawdust, he loses half his income. I'm not lying. I know that. But Harold doesn't care about truth. He cares about money. Thomas looked past her into the cabin. They're coming to prove you're a fraud. And if they can't prove it, they'll make you one. Emily felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature. What does that mean? It means they'll find a way to destroy those bricks, or destroy your reputation, or both. Thomas grabbed her arm. Pack your things. Come to town. Stay with me and my wife until this blows over. I'm not leaving my cabin. They'll burn it down if they think it'll protect their business. Then they'll burn it with me in it. Thomas stared at her. You're insane. Maybe, but I'm staying. Thomas released her arm and stepped back. Then you're on your own. I tried to help you. Remember that when Harold shows up. He mounted his horse and rode off into the darkness. Emily closed the door and leaned against it, her mind racing. Men coming. Angry men. Men with something to lose. She looked at the stove, at the bricks stacked neatly beside it, at Sophia sleeping in the bed. Everything she had was in this cabin. She couldn't run. She wouldn't run. Morning came gray and bitter. Emily fed the stove and made herself eat, though her stomach twisted with nerves. She dressed Sophia in her warmest clothes. She stacked extra bricks by the hearth where they'd be visible. At 10 o'clock, the men arrived. There were 4 of them. Harold Gunnarsson was a big man with a thick beard and eyes that calculated profit before humanity. His 3 companions were younger, harder looking. They tied their horses outside, and Harold knocked once before opening the door without invitation. Mrs. Andersson, he said, stepping inside. Heard you're making miracles out of sawdust. Emily stood by the stove, Sophia in her arms. I'm burning fuel, same as everyone. Sawdust isn't fuel. Harold walked to the hearth, picked up a brick, turned it over in his hands. This is garbage. Compressed garbage. It burns. Nothing burns like seasoned wood. That's a fact. Harold tossed the brick back onto the pile. You telling folks otherwise? That's fraud. I'm not telling anyone anything. I'm surviving winter. One of the younger men laughed. Surviving? It's October. Winter hasn't even started. Harold held up his hand, silencing his companion. Show me. If these bricks work like you claim, prove it. Emily shifted Sophia to her other hip. The stove's already burning. Look for yourself. Harold crouched by the stove, peered through the cracked door at the glowing brick inside. He watched it for a full minute, his face expressionless. Then he stood. Could be wood. Could be anything. I'm not convinced. Then leave unconvinced. Can't do that. See, people are talking about you. About how you're staying warm without buying proper firewood. That talk costs me money. Harold stepped closer. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to admit these bricks don't work. You're going to buy wood from me, proper wood, and you're going to tell everyone who asks that sawdust can't replace timber. Emily's hands tightened around Sophia. No. No? I won't lie. The bricks work. They burn hotter and longer than wood. Harold's face darkened. You're calling me a liar? I'm stating facts. One of the younger men moved toward the brick pile. Maybe we should test these ourselves, see if they're as good as she claims. Harold nodded. Good idea. Boys, load up those bricks. We'll take them back to town, run some proper tests." Emily stepped between them and the bricks. "Those are mine. You're not taking them." "You refusing to let us verify your claims? Sounds like someone with something to hide." "I'm protecting my property from thieves." Harold's hand moved fast, grabbing Emily's wrist. Sophia started crying. Harold's grip was iron hard, his face inches from Emily's. "Listen close, widow. You got two choices. Give us the bricks, or we take them. Either way, we're leaving with proof that you're selling snake oil." Emily's voice came out steady, despite her fear. "You take my fuel, my baby freezes. That makes you a murderer." "That makes me a businessman, protecting his interests." The door burst open. Jonas Linkfist stood in the threshold, a rifle cradled in his arms. "Let her go, Harold." Harold released Emily's wrist, but didn't back away. "This isn't your concern, Jonas. Woman and a baby about to freeze? That's everyone's concern." Jonas didn't raise the rifle, but his hands were positioned right. "You boys rode a long way for nothing. Time to head home." "We came to verify. You came to steal. I watched you through the window." Jonas stepped fully inside. "Now you got a choice. Leave peacefully or leave with trouble." Harold's jaw worked. He looked at his men, at Jonas, at Emily. Finally, he spat on the cabin floor. "This isn't over. Come spring, everyone's going to know you're a fraud." "Come spring, everyone's going to know these bricks work," Emily said. Harold and his men left. Jonas watched through the window until they were out of sight, then lowered the rifle. "You got enemies now," he said. "I had enemies the moment I decided to survive without buying wood." Jonas set the rifle by the door. "Harold's not just talk. He'll come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he'll come back. Then I'll deal with it when he does." "How? You and what army?" Emily looked down at Sophia, who had quieted in her arms. "I don't need an army. I need truth. These bricks work. Everyone will see that eventually." Jonas shook his head. "Truth doesn't feed families. Money does. And you're threatening Harold's money." "I'm not threatening anything. I'm just trying to live." "Same thing to men like him." Jonas left an hour later, after making Emily promise to bar the door at night. She promised, then sat by the stove, feeding bricks, watching the fire, thinking about men who saw survival as competition. The next day, Marta came. She arrived mid-morning, carrying a basket, and moving with the quick efficiency of someone who'd walked miles in cold before. Emily opened the door to find her already smiling. "Jonas told me about Harold," Marta said, stepping inside. "I brought bread." The bread was still warm. Emily could have cried from the kindness of it. They sat together by the stove, Sophia content in Marta's lap, and ate in comfortable silence. Finally, Marta spoke. "Show me how the bricks work. Really show me. I want to understand." Emily did. She explained the compression, the pitch binding, the heat output, the burn time. She demonstrated the stacking, the airflow, the ash consistency. Marta listened with the kind of attention that came from genuine curiosity. When Emily finished, Marta nodded slowly. "Olaf was smarter than anyone knew." "You knew him?" "A little. He kept to himself mostly. But once, during a bad winter, he told me something strange." Marta shifted Sophia in her arms. "He said the secret to surviving wasn't strength. It was compression, making everything smaller, tighter, more dense. I thought he meant storing food. Now I understand he meant fuel." "These bricks are dense as stone. They burn forever." "How many do you have left?" Emily had known the question was coming. 2,400, maybe less. And winter's just starting. I know. Marta was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're burning too fast. Jonas told me about the 42 below night. You can't sustain that pace." "I don't have a choice. When it gets that cold, you let the cabin get colder. 50 degrees instead of 70. 40 instead of 60. Sophia will survive 40 degrees wrapped in blankets, better than she'll survive running out of fuel in January." Marta's voice was gentle but firm. "You're thinking day by day. You need to think month by month." Emily felt tears threaten. "I'm trying to keep her warm." "I know, but warm enough is different than comfortable. You need to learn the difference." They talked for 2 hours. Marta shared techniques she'd learned from 11 winters: how to layer clothes for maximum insulation, how to heat stones and wrap them in fabric for bed warmers, how to position furniture to trap heat near the stove. She showed Emily how to bank the fire at night so it burned slower, how to read the stove's temperature by the metal's color, how to make soup last 3 days instead of 1. When Marta finally stood to leave, she touched Emily's shoulder. "You might survive this," she said, "but there are many ifs." "How many?" "Too many to count. But you're stubborn. That helps." After Marta left, Emily implemented every suggestion. She let the cabin temperature drop to 50 degrees during the day, 45 at night. She wrapped Sophia in layers. She banked the fire. She measured her brick consumption obsessively. 3 days passed, then 5, then a week. The temperature outside ranged from 10 below to 30 below. Inside, the cabin stayed livable. Barely. Emily wore every piece of clothing she owned. Sophia cried from the chill until Emily learned to keep her against skin, body heat to body heat, the whole day and night. Emily's brick consumption dropped to 28 per day, then 25. She was making the fuel last, but she was also exhausted. She slept in 30-minute intervals, waking to feed the stove, check Sophia, adjust blankets. She ate once a day, sometimes less. Her hands developed chilblains from constant exposure to cold. Her body ached in ways she didn't know were possible. On October 26th, Jonas came with news. "Harold's been talking in town," he said, standing just inside the door, refusing to sit. "Telling everyone your bricks will fail, that you'll come begging for wood by November." "Let him talk. He's also saying he'll sell you wood when you do, at double price." Emily felt anger replace exhaustion. "I won't need his wood." "You sure about that?" "Completely." Jonas looked at the brick pile, which had visibly diminished. "How many you got left?" "Enough." "That's not a number. It's the only answer you're getting." Jonas almost smiled. "Stubborn. Someone recently told me that helps." After Jonas left, Emily did something she hadn't allowed herself to do since arriving. She climbed into the loft and counted every remaining brick. 2,147. She'd burned 853 bricks in 2 months. At current consumption, she had 85 days of fuel remaining. Winter lasted at least 150 days. She was going to run out. Emily sat in the loft, surrounded by her dwindling fuel supply, and felt the full weight of her situation. She couldn't increase her supply. She couldn't decrease winter's length. She couldn't make the bricks burn slower. All she could do was burn less, which meant colder, which meant risk. She climbed down from the loft and looked at Sophia, sleeping peacefully in the warm cabin. The baby trusted her, needed her, depended on her to make choices that kept them both alive. Emily fed another brick into the stove and watched it catch fire. The heat was immediate, comforting, familiar. She thought about Marta's words, warm enough versus comfortable. She thought about Harold's threats, about Jonas's doubts, about Thomas's warnings. Then she thought about Olaf Mikkelsen, alone in this cabin, making thousands of bricks because he understood something no one else did. Compression. Density. The difference between surviving and merely existing. Emily made her decision. Starting tomorrow, she would burn 20 bricks per day. Not 28, not 25, 20. The cabin would be cold, so cold. But they would survive. They had to. Because giving up meant Harold won, meant the bricks failed, meant Olaf's wisdom died with his departure. Emily wouldn't let that happen. She fed Sophia, changed her, wrapped her in double blankets. Then she banked the fire low, very low, and crawled into bed beside her daughter. The cabin temperature dropped to 38 degrees before dawn. But Emily and Sophia woke alive. And that, for now, was enough. November came with snow that didn't melt. It fell for 3 days straight, piling against the cabin walls, blocking the window's lower half, turning the world into a white prison. Emily woke on the 4th morning to find frost coating the inside walls. Sophia's breathing sounded wrong. Emily pulled the baby close, felt her forehead. Hot. Too hot. She unwrapped the blankets, checked Sophia's chest. The baby's breathing was rapid and shallow, her tiny ribs pulling with each inhale. "No," Emily whispered. "No, no, no." She fed 3 bricks into the stove, breaking her rationing rule immediately. The temperature had to rise. Sophia needed warmth. The mathematics of fuel didn't matter if the baby stopped breathing. The cabin warmed to 50 degrees within an hour. Sophia's breathing eased slightly, but the fever remained. Emily held her daughter against her chest, skin to skin, and tried to remember everything her mother had taught her about childhood illnesses. Keep them warm, keep them hydrated, watch for the rattle in the lungs. Emily had no medicine, no doctor within 8 miles, no way to get help through 3 feet of snow. She was alone with a sick baby and a dwindling fuel supply, and winter pressing in from every direction. At noon, someone knocked. Emily opened the door to find Marta standing in snowshoes, her face red with cold and exertion. "I had a feeling," Marta said, stepping inside and immediately moving to the bed where Sophia lay. She touched the baby's forehead, listened to her breathing, examined her color. "How long has she been like this?" "Since this morning, maybe earlier, I don't know. I was so cold last night I barely slept." Marta's face tightened. "You let the cabin get too cold." "I was rationing. Rationing can kill as sure as running out." Marta unwrapped a bundle she'd been carrying. Inside were dried herbs, a small jar of honey, and clean cloth. "Make tea with this. 1 spoonful of herbs, 2 of honey. Get it into her however you can. And keep this cabin above 45 degrees. Do you understand me? Above 45. I don't have enough fuel to—" "You don't have a baby if she dies from your rationing." Marta's voice was sharp. "Burn what you need to burn. Figure out the rest later." Emily took the herbs with shaking hands. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just keep her alive." Marta moved to the door, then turned back. "Jonas and I are slaughtering a pig tomorrow. I'll bring you some of the fat. You can burn it if you need to. It's not much, but it might buy you a few days." After Marta left, Emily made the tea. Getting it into Sophia was torture. The baby fought, coughed, spit out half of what Emily managed to get past her lips. But some went down. Emily could only hope it was enough. She fed the stove every 30 minutes that day, burned through 40 bricks, watched her fuel supply shrink, and told herself it didn't matter because Sophia was breathing, and that was the only thing that mattered. By evening, the fever broke. Sophia's breathing normalized. She nursed properly for the first time all day. Emily cried with relief, holding her daughter, feeling the fragile miracle of survival. She'd burned 40 bricks in 1 day. She had 2,107 left. 52 days of fuel at that rate. Winter was barely starting. The next morning, Emily made a new plan. She would burn 20 bricks per day, except when Sophia showed signs of illness. She would monitor the baby obsessively. She would let herself freeze before she let Sophia suffer. It was a plan built on hope and desperation, but it was all she had. 3 days later, Jonas arrived with news that made everything worse. "Harold's filed a complaint with the territorial marshal," Jonas said, standing by the stove and warming his hands. "Says you're running a fraud operation, selling sawdust bricks to desperate people." Emily looked up from feeding Sophia. "I'm not selling anything to anyone." "He's claiming you will. That you're planning to make money off people's desperation come spring." "That's a lie." "Doesn't matter if it's true or not. The marshal's investigating. He'll be here within the week." Emily felt her stomach drop. What happens if he believes Harold? Best case, he tells you to stop burning the bricks. Worst case, he confiscates them as evidence of fraud and you freeze. On what grounds? Harold's claiming the bricks are dangerous, that they could cause chimney fires, explosions, carbon monoxide poisoning. He's got 3 experts willing to testify. Jonas's expression was grim. They're all timbermen. Every one of them loses money if people stop buying firewood. Emily stood, her hands clenched. So I'm supposed to just surrender? Buy Harold's overpriced wood and admit defeat? I'm saying you need to be ready to defend yourself. The marshal won't care about your survival. He'll care about the law. And if Harold can make a legal case that you're endangering yourself or defrauding others, he wins. There's no fraud. The bricks work. Then prove it. Document everything. Temperatures, burn times, fuel consumption. Make a record he can't dispute. After Jonas left, Emily started writing. She tore pages from her husband's Bible, the only paper she had, and began recording everything. Each brick burned, each temperature reading, each day survived. She wrote by candlelight, her fingers cramped from cold, creating a ledger of her own survival. On November 15th, the marshal came. His name was William Cross, and he rode a gray horse through 2 feet of snow to reach Emily's cabin. He was a lean man, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much hardness to be impressed by more of it. Emily opened the door and invited him in. Cross dismounted, tied his horse, and stepped into the cabin with the careful movements of someone expecting trouble. "Mrs. Andersson, I'm here about Harold Gunnarsson's complaint." "I know why you're here." Cross looked around the cabin, at the stove burning steadily, at the brick pile, at Sophia sleeping in the bed, at Emily's makeshift ledger on the packing crate table. "Mr. Gunnarsson claims you're perpetrating a fraud. Says these sawdust bricks don't work, and you're planning to sell them to unsuspecting people. I'm not selling anything. I'm surviving winter." By burning sawdust? By burning compressed sawdust bricks mixed with pine pitch. There's a difference. Cross walked to the hearth, picked up a brick, examined it. Sawdust is a fire hazard. Every sawmill in the territory has regulations about it. Loose sawdust, yes. This is compressed and bound. It's stable. Says who? Says the man who made them. Says my own experience. Says the fact that I've been burning them for 3 months without incident. Cross set the brick down and picked up Emily's ledger. He read through several pages, his expression unchanging. Finally, he looked at her. "You've documented everything." "Yes." "Daily temperatures, burn rates, consumption patterns?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I knew someone would question it. Because I knew men like Harold would rather see me fail than accept that there's a better way." Cross was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Show me how they burn." Emily demonstrated everything. She showed him how to position the brick, how to adjust the airflow, how to monitor the burn. She explained the compression ratio, the pitch binding, the heat output compared to standard firewood. She showed him her calculations proving the bricks were more efficient than wood. Cross watched without interrupting. When she finished, He walked to the window and looked out at his horse, standing patient in the snow. "How many bricks do you have left?" 2,063. "And winter lasts how long here?" 4 more months, maybe 5. Cross turned back to her. "You'll run out." "I know." "What happens then?" "I don't know, but I'll deal with it when it comes." Cross pulled a small notebook from his coat and wrote something down. Emily's heart hammered. This was it. He was going to rule against her, confiscate the bricks, end everything. Instead, Cross closed the notebook and looked at her directly. "Mr. Gunnarsson's complaint is dismissed. What you're doing isn't fraud. It's innovation, born of necessity." He moved toward the door. "But I'm going to tell you something off the record. Harold has money and influence. This won't be the last time he comes after you. So you need to decide what matters more, being right or being alive." "Can't I be both?" Cross almost smiled. "Not in my experience." He left. Emily stood in the doorway, watching him ride away, feeling a victory that tasted like ash, because she knew it wasn't over. Harold wouldn't stop. The cold wouldn't stop. Winter wouldn't stop. But she was still alive, still burning bricks, still fighting. That afternoon, Marta arrived with the promised pig fat, 20 pounds of it, rendered and stored in clay jars. "This will burn," Marta said, setting the jars by the hearth. "Not as hot as the bricks, but it'll burn. Use it when you need to." Emily hugged her. Actually hugged her. Marta stiffened, then softened, then hugged back. "You're not alone in this," Marta said quietly. "Remember that." After Marta left, Emily cried for the first time since arriving in Montana. Not from fear or exhaustion or cold, but from the overwhelming weight of kindness. Someone cared if she lived. Someone brought her fuel. Someone believed in her. She fed Sophia, fed the stove, and made a new entry in her ledger. November 15th. Marshall ruled in my favor. Received 20 pounds pig fat from Marta. Baby healthy. Cabin temperature 47 degrees. Burned 22 bricks today. The temperature dropped to 15 below that night. Emily burned 23 bricks and kept the cabin at 45 degrees. Sophia slept warm. Emily slept in intervals, waking to feed the fire, check her daughter, listen to the wind howl. At 3 in the morning, she heard horses. Emily sat up, her heart racing. Hoofbeats outside. Multiple horses. Voices speaking low. She grabbed the poker from the stove and moved to the window. Through the frost, she could see shapes. 3 men, maybe 4. They were circling the cabin. Then someone pounded on the door. "Open up, Mrs. Andersson." Harold's voice. Emily didn't move, didn't speak. Sophia started crying. "I know you're in there. The marshal might have believed your lies, but I don't. You're going to freeze, and when you do, I want everyone to know it wasn't my fault." Emily held the poker tighter. "Leave, now." "Not until you admit those bricks don't work. Not until you buy proper wood from me." "Get off my property." "This isn't over." Harold's voice rose. "You hear me? This isn't over." The horses moved away. Emily waited by the door, poker raised, until the sound faded completely. Then she barred the door, checked every window, and sat with Sophia in the bed, trembling. Harold had come to her cabin, at night, with men. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about power. About a man who couldn't accept being wrong. Emily fed another brick into the stove and watched the fire catch. The heat was immediate, reliable, real. Harold could threaten all he wanted. The bricks worked. That was truth. And truth didn't change just because someone shouted louder. But truth also didn't keep you safe. Emily spent the rest of the night awake, the poker beside her, listening for hoofbeats. None came, but she knew Harold would return. Men like him always returned. Morning came cold and clear. Emily made coffee, fed Sophia, recorded yesterday's brick consumption in her ledger. 23 bricks, 2,040 remaining. 88 days of fuel at current rate. 126 days until spring. The mathematics were brutal, but Emily had learned something important over the past weeks. Mathematics could be rewritten. Consumption could be reduced. Suffering could be endured. She would make it work. She had to. At noon, Jonas came with firewood. Emily stared at the stack he unloaded from his wagon. Seasoned pine, split and ready to burn. At least half a cord. "I can't pay you," she said. "Didn't ask you to." "Jonas, listen. You've proven your bricks work. That's admirable. But you're going to run out. We both know it." Jonas stacked the wood neatly by the cabin wall. "This is insurance, for when the bricks are gone and you still need heat." "Why are you helping me?" Jonas straightened, brushing bark from his gloves. "Because you remind me of someone. My sister. She was stubborn as stone, too. Refused help from everyone. Died one winter when she didn't need to." He met Emily's eyes. "I won't watch that happen again." "I'm not your sister." "No, but you're human. And humans need help sometimes. Even the stubborn ones." After Jonas left, Emily stood looking at the woodpile. It represented everything she'd been fighting against. Dependence, charity, admission that she couldn't do this alone. But it also represented survival, a backup plan, a bridge between running out of bricks and the arrival of spring. She touched one of the logs, solid, real, ready to burn. Then she went inside and fed another brick into the stove, because she wasn't ready to admit defeat yet. Maybe she never would be. November crawled forward. The temperature dropped below zero and stayed there. Emily burned 20 bricks per day and kept the cabin hovering at 45 degrees. Sophia grew stronger, her cheeks filling out, her cries becoming more demanding than distressed. Emily grew thinner. She ate one meal a day, sometimes less. Her body consumed itself to stay warm. Her hands cracked and bled from the cold. Her feet ached constantly from mild frostbite that never quite healed. But she survived. Day by day, brick by brick, she survived. On November 28th, something changed. Marta arrived at dawn, moving fast despite the deep snow, her face urgent. "Thomas Renner wants to see you," she said. "He's at our cabin. Says it's important." "I'm not leaving Sophia." "Bring her. This matters." They walked to the Linkfist cabin, Sophia bundled against Emily's chest. Thomas was waiting inside, his merchant smile replaced by something that looked like genuine respect. "Mrs. Andersson, I owe you an apology." Emily waited. "I told you burning sawdust was madness. I was wrong." Thomas pulled out a small leather journal. "I've been tracking winter survival rates in this valley for 8 years. Most years, we lose at least one family to cold, sometimes more. This year?" He looked up. "Nobody. Not one person has frozen. And you want to know why?" Emily's heart started beating faster. "People are talking about your bricks, about how you're surviving without buying wood. And it's got folks thinking different about conservation, about alternative fuels, about making do with what they have instead of what they can buy." Thomas closed the journal. "You've changed something here. Maybe you don't see it yet, but you have." "I'm just trying not to freeze." "You're doing more than that. You're proving there's another way." Thomas stood. "I came to tell you that when spring comes, I want to learn how to make those bricks. and I want to sell them in my store, with your permission." Emily stared at him. "You want to sell sawdust bricks?" "I want to give people options. Firewood for those who can afford it. Bricks for those who can't. You created something valuable, Mrs. Andersson. Let me help you share it." Emily looked at Marta, at Jonas, at Thomas. 3 people who doubted her and now believed. 3 people ready to help instead of hinder. "Olaf created it," Emily said quietly. "I just figured out how to use it." "Then we'll honor him by making sure his wisdom doesn't die in this valley." Emily felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite hope, not quite relief, but something close to both. "When spring comes," she said, "we'll talk." Thomas smiled. "The real kind this time. I'll hold you to that." Walking back to her cabin through the snow, Emily felt the weight of Thomas's words settle over her like a blanket. She'd spent 3 months focused solely on survival, on making it through each day without freezing. The idea that her struggle might mean something beyond her own life hadn't occurred to her. But she didn't have time to think about spring. December was coming, and with it, the worst of winter. The first week of December brought temperatures that made November seem mild. 20 below became the new normal. 30 below was common. The wind came from the north with a howl that never stopped, pressing against the cabin walls like something alive and hungry. Emily burned through her bricks faster, 22 per day, then 24. The cabin temperature dropped to 40 degrees and wouldn't rise higher no matter how much she fed the stove. On December 7th, she counted her remaining bricks, 1,618. 67 days of fuel at current consumption. Spring was 93 days away. The mathematics were finally, absolutely, undeniably impossible. Emily sat on the cabin floor with Sophia in her lap and faced the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She would run out. The bricks wouldn't last. All her rationing, all her calculations, all her stubborn determination, none of it changed the simple fact that winter was longer than her fuel supply. She had Jonas's firewood, half a cord, maybe 30 days of heat if she burned it carefully. That still left her short, which meant she had 2 choices: leave the cabin and accept charity, or burn the cabin itself when the fuel ran out. Emily looked around at the walls that had sheltered her, at the stove that had kept her alive, at the loft, where thousands of Olaf's bricks still waited to be burned. This cabin had been her prison and her salvation. Leaving felt like defeat. Burning it felt like murder. She was still sitting there when someone knocked. Emily opened the door, expecting Jonas or Marta. Instead, she found a woman she'd never seen before. Young, maybe 20, with a baby on her hip, and desperation in her eyes. "You're Emily Andersson?" the woman asked. "Yes." "I'm Ruth Palmer. I live 6 miles south. My husband died in October, and I've been burning furniture to stay warm." Ruth's voice cracked. "I heard you had a way to survive without firewood. I need to know how. Please." Emily stepped back, letting Ruth inside. The woman's cabin must have been colder than Emily's. Ruth was so thin, her bones showed through her dress, and her baby looked small for its age. "Sit by the stove," Emily said. "I'll make coffee." Over coffee made from grounds Emily had used twice already, Ruth told her story. Her husband had been killed in a logging accident. She'd been left with a baby, a cabin, and no money. She'd burned their furniture, their tools, everything that would catch fire. Now she was burning the cabin's interior walls. "Another week, and I'll have nothing left," Ruth said, her hands shaking around the cup. "Someone in town mentioned you were surviving on sawdust. I thought they were joking. But then, Thomas Renner said it was true." Emily showed her the bricks, Explain the compression, the pitch, the burn characteristics. Ruth listened with the kind of desperate attention that came from having no other options. "Can I buy some from you?" Ruth asked. "I have $7. Emily looked at her remaining brick pile, then at Ruth's baby, then at Sophia. "I can't sell you what I need to survive," Emily said slowly, "but I can show you how to make your own." "Do you have access to sawdust?" "The mill by my cabin. They've got piles of it." "And pine pitch?" "The trees are full of it." "Then you can make bricks. It'll take time and work, but you can do it." Emily spent the next 2 hours teaching Ruth everything: how to collect the sawdust, how to heat the pitch, how to mix them in the right ratio, how to compress the mixture into forms, how to wrap and cure the finished bricks. Ruth wrote everything down on scraps of paper Emily tore from her ledger. When she finally stood to leave, she grabbed Emily's hands. "You saved my life today," Ruth said. "I gave you information. You have to do the work." "Information is what I needed." Ruth wrapped her baby tighter. "Thank you." After Ruth left, Emily fed another brick into the stove and thought about what had just happened. She'd given away Olaf's secret, the method that was keeping her alive, the knowledge that might have been worth money come spring. But Ruth's baby would survive now. That mattered more than any future profit. The next day, Jonas arrived with troubling news. "Harold knows about Ruth Palmer's visit," Jonas said, standing by the stove and refusing to sit. "He's telling everyone you're starting a business, that you're recruiting desperate women to spread your fraud." "I'm not recruiting anyone. Ruth came to me." "Doesn't matter. Harold's using it as proof that you're dangerous. He's filed another complaint with the marshal." Emily felt rage replace exhaustion. Marshal Cross dismissed the first complaint. "This one's different. Harold's claiming you're creating a public safety hazard, that desperate women are going to start making unstable sawdust bricks that'll burn their cabins down. He wants the marshal to shut you down before someone gets killed." "That's insane." "That's strategy." Jonas moved toward the door. "Cross will be here again, soon. And this time, Harold's got the town council behind him." After Jonas left, Emily sat with Sophia and tried to think. Harold was escalating. He wouldn't stop until she either gave up or left. And now he had a new angle: public safety. The idea that Emily's survival method was dangerous to others. She looked at her ledger, at her careful documentation of temperatures and burn times and safety protocols. She had proof the bricks worked. But did she have proof they were safe for others to make? What if Ruth made a mistake? What if her mixture ratio was wrong? What if her compression was inadequate? What if someone did burn their cabin down, trying to recreate Olaf's method? Emily pushed the thoughts away. Ruth was careful. She'd written everything down. She'd understood the principles. She would be fine. But doubt had entered Emily's mind like smoke, and once there, it was impossible to clear. That night, the temperature dropped to 41 below zero. Emily burned through 36 bricks, keeping the cabin at 38 degrees. Sophia cried constantly from the cold. Emily held her daughter against her chest, skin to skin, and sang every song she knew until her voice gave out. At midnight, the stove cracked. Not the door this time, the body itself. A hairline fracture appeared along the left side, invisible until Emily noticed heat escaping where it shouldn't. She ran her hand along the metal and felt the split. The stove was failing. Emily grabbed rags, soaked them in water, packed them against the crack. The water froze almost immediately, creating a seal. Temporary, fragile, but enough. She fed another brick, then another. The stove held. By morning, she'd burned 43 bricks, and the crack had widened. Emily could see firelight through the split. If it spread to the bottom, coals would spill out. The cabin would burn. She had no way to repair it. No tools, no skills, no replacement stove. Everything depended on a cracked iron box holding together for 3 more months. Emily added this to her ledger. December 8th, stove cracked. Temporary seal holding. Burned 43 bricks. Cabin temp 38 degrees. Baby crying from cold. At noon, Marta came with food and found Emily sitting on the floor, staring at the stove. "What's wrong?" Emily pointed to the crack. Marta crouched beside it, examined it, touched the makeshift seal. "How long has it been like this?" "Since last night." "And you didn't come get Jonas?" "I can't leave Sophia in this cold, and I can't carry her 6 miles in 40 below." Marta stood. "I'm getting Jonas. He can patch this properly." "With what? I have no money for—" "With fire clay and wire, which he has, which he'll use, because that's what neighbors do." Marta was already moving to the door. "Keep that fire low. Don't let the metal heat too much, or the crack will spread." She left. Emily sat with Sophia and watched the stove like it was a dying patient. Every creak of metal made her flinch. Every pop of burning wood made her certain this was it. The stove was failing. Everything was ending. Jonas arrived 2 hours later with a bucket of fire clay and a roll of wire. He worked silently, packing the clay into the crack, wrapping the wire around the stove body to hold the patch in place. When he finished, he stepped back and examined his work. "This'll hold for a while, but that stove's old. Another extreme cold snap, and it could crack somewhere else." "How do I prevent that?" "You don't. You pray." Jonas washed his hands in Emily's wash basin. "Or you use my firewood. It burns cooler than your bricks. Less stress on the metal." Emily looked at her brick pile. 1,575 bricks remaining after last night's burn. Then at Jonas's wood pile outside, untouched. "I'll use the bricks until they're gone. Then I'll use your wood." "That's pride talking." "That's survival talking. The bricks burn hotter. They'll keep Sophia warmer." Jonas shook his head. "You're going to kill yourself being stubborn. Better than killing myself being dependent." After Jonas left, Emily fed the stove carefully, watching the patch, monitoring the temperature. The repair held. The cabin warmed to 43 degrees. Sophia stopped crying. Emily wrote in her ledger, "Stove repaired. Clay patch holding. Must burn cooler to preserve stove integrity." But burning cooler meant burning more bricks. The mathematics tightened further. On December 15th, Marshal Cross returned. This time he wasn't alone. He brought Harold Gunnarsson and 3 town council members. They crowded into Emily's small cabin, making it feel claustrophobic and hostile. "Mrs. Andersson," Cross said, his voice formal. "Mr. Gunnarsson has raised new concerns about your sawdust bricks. Specifically, that you're encouraging others to make unstable fuel that could endanger lives." "I'm not encouraging anything. I'm answering questions when people ask." Harold stepped forward. "You told Ruth Palmer how to make these death traps. Now she's got a pile of sawdust sitting in her cabin. What happens when it explodes?" "It won't explode. It's compressed and bound with pitch," says you. But you're not an expert. You're a widow with a dead husband and a dangerous obsession. Emily felt fury rise like heat. "My husband has nothing to do with this." "Doesn't he? You trying to prove something? That you don't need help? That you're smarter than everyone else?" Harold's face was red. "Well, you're not. You're reckless. And when someone dies because of your advice, their blood's on your hands." One of the council members, an older man named Peter Strauss, cleared his throat. "Marshal Cross, perhaps we should examine the evidence before making accusations." Cross nodded. "Mrs. Andersson, do you have documentation of your fuel usage?" Emily handed him her ledger. Cross read through it carefully, passing each page to the council members. They studied her meticulous records. Every temperature, every burn time, every brick consumed. Finally, Peter Strauss spoke. "This is thorough work, scientific even. I see no evidence of recklessness here." "She's still spreading dangerous information," Harold said. "Information isn't dangerous. Ignorance is." Peter looked at Emily. "Did you tell Mrs. Palmer to be careful? To test her bricks thoroughly before relying on them?" "Yes, I told her everything I know about safety protocols." "Then you've done your due diligence." Peter turned to Cross. "I move we dismiss this complaint. Mrs. Andersson is surviving winter using an unconventional but documented method. She's sharing knowledge, not selling snake oil." Harold's face went dark. "This is about money, isn't it? You want to cut me out of the timber business." "This is about survival," Peter interrupted. "And Mrs. Andersson has proven she can survive. That's more than we can say for the families who freeze because they can't afford your firewood." The room went silent. Harold looked at each council member, at Cross, at Emily. His expression was pure rage. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "It is for today." Cross closed his notebook. "Mrs. Andersson, continue your documentation. If anyone gets hurt using your method, we'll revisit this. Until then, you're within your rights." They left, all except Peter Strauss, who lingered at the door. "My daughter died in childbirth 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Left behind a husband and 2 children. They nearly froze the first winter because they couldn't afford wood. Your bricks could have saved them." He met Emily's eyes. "What you're doing matters. Don't let Harold convince you otherwise." After he left, Emily sat with Sophia and shook. Not from cold, from the weight of what Peter had said. People had died from lack of fuel, would die again, and she had a method that could prevent it. But she also had a cracked stove, and a dwindling fuel supply, and a baby who depended on her making it to spring. She couldn't save everyone. She could barely save herself. That night, Emily made a decision. She would use Jonas's firewood starting tomorrow. Not because she was giving up on the bricks, but because the stove couldn't handle the heat stress anymore, and a broken stove meant death faster than running out of fuel. She fed 1 more brick into the stove and watched it catch fire. The flames were beautiful and terrible and familiar. She'd burned over 1,400 bricks. Each one had kept her alive. Each one had brought her closer to running out. Tomorrow she would start burning wood, slower burning, cooler, gentler on the stove. It would last longer, but it wouldn't burn as hot. The cabin would be colder. Sophia would suffer more, but they would survive. Probably. Maybe. If the mathematics worked out. Emily pulled Sophia close and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Promises about spring, about warmth, about futures that extended beyond the next day's fuel supply. Outside, the wind howled. The temperature dropped. Winter pressed against the cabin walls like something that would never end. But inside, the stove burned. The patch held. Sophia breathed warm against Emily's chest. And that, for 1 more night, was enough. The firewood burned differently than the bricks. Slower, gentler. The flames were softer, the heat less intense. Emily fed the stove with Jonas's split pine and watched the cabin temperature hover at 40 degrees instead of 50. Sophia cried more. Emily wore every piece of clothing she owned and still shivered. But the stove held together. The patch didn't spread. The cracked iron stayed intact. By December 20th, Emily had burned through 1/3 of Jonas's firewood, and touched none of her remaining bricks. The mathematics had shifted again. If she could stretch the wood to January, she'd still have over 1,500 bricks for February and March. Spring came in late March, sometimes early April. She might actually make it. But winter had other plans. On December 23rd, Ruth Palmer arrived at dawn, her baby bundled against her chest, her face streaked with tears. "They're gone," Ruth said, her voice breaking. "All of them. Harold took them." Emily pulled Ruth inside. "Took what?" "My bricks. I made 40 of them. 40! It took me 2 weeks, working every night after my baby slept. I tested them like you said. They worked perfectly." Ruth sank onto the packing crate, her whole body shaking. "Harold came yesterday with a marshal. Said my bricks were evidence of public endangerment. Cross confiscated them all." Emily felt rage ignite in her chest. "Cross ruled in my favor, twice. He said mine were different, that I wasn't the original maker, that I didn't have documentation proving they were safe." Ruth looked up, her eyes desperate. "Emily, I have nothing left to burn. My cabin walls are gone. My furniture is gone. I was counting on those bricks to get me through January." Emily thought fast. She had 1,532 bricks remaining. If she gave Ruth 50, she'd still have 1,482, enough for February and March, if she was careful. "I'll give you bricks," Emily said. "I can't pay. I'm not asking for payment. You need them. I have them. That's all that matters." They loaded 50 bricks into Ruth's wagon. Ruth cried the entire time, thanking Emily over and over. Emily waved away the gratitude and helped secure the load. "Make them last," Emily said. "Burn conservative. Don't let your cabin get warm. Let it get survivable." After Ruth left, Emily returned to her cabin and recalculated. 1,482 bricks. Jonas's firewood nearly half gone. 97 days until spring. The mathematics were tight again, brutally tight, but possible. That afternoon, Jonas appeared at her door with Marta and Thomas Renner. All three looked grim. "Harold's escalating," Jonas said without preamble. "He confiscated Ruth's bricks as a test. If Cross backs him, he'll come for yours next." "On what grounds?" "Public safety. Harold's claiming that anyone who makes bricks based on your instructions is creating dangerous material. He wants all sawdust bricks in the valley confiscated and destroyed." Emily felt her hands clench. "That's my fuel. My survival." "I know." Jonas glanced at Marta, then back to Emily. "That's why we're here. We have a plan." Thomas stepped forward. "I'm calling a town meeting. Tomorrow. Everyone who's struggled to afford firewood, everyone who's lost someone to the cold, everyone who's tired of Harold's monopoly. They're all coming. And you're going to show them your ledger, your documentation, your proof that the bricks work and are safe. Harold will fight it. Let him. The town council has 3 members who support you now. Peter Strauss convinced 2 others. If we can sway public opinion, Harold loses his leverage." Marta touched Emily's arm. "You've survived 4 months on Olaf's bricks. That's not fraud. That's innovation. People need to see that." Emily looked at Sophia, sleeping peacefully in the rope bed, then at her 3 visitors. They were offering her a chance to fight back, to turn her private survival into public proof. "I'll come," Emily said, "but I'm bringing my daughter. I won't leave her alone in this cold." The town meeting convened at noon on December 24th in the general store. 37 people crowded into the space. Emily stood at the front with Sophia in her arms, her ledger on the counter beside her. Harold sat in the back, his arms crossed, his expression murderous. Peter Strauss called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss Mrs. Anderson's survival method and Mr. Gunnarson's claims that it poses a public danger. Mrs. Andersson, please present your evidence." Emily opened her ledger and began reading. Every temperature, every brick burned, every day survived. The crowd listened in silence. When she finished, she held up the ledger. 4 months, 123 days, 1,468 bricks burned, 0 fires, 0 injuries, 0 failures. My daughter is healthy. My cabin is intact. My stove is functional. These are facts, not theories. Harold stood. Facts can be manipulated. You could have burned regular wood and claimed it was bricks. You could have falsified those numbers. Where's the real proof? The real proof is I'm alive, Emily said quietly. I came to this valley with $43 and a baby. Everyone told me I'd freeze. You told me I'd freeze. But I didn't. Because Olaf Mikkelsen left behind something nobody understood, and I learned how to use it. A woman Emily didn't recognize stood up. I'm Sarah Chen. I lost my husband last winter. Froze to death in his own cabin because we couldn't afford Harold's firewood. If these bricks had existed then, he'd still be alive. Another voice. I'm Martin Kowalski. I spent $60 on firewood last year. 60! That's 2 months' wages. These bricks could change everything. Harold's face went red. You're all fools. Sawdust doesn't burn. It never has, it never will. This woman is lying to you. Then explain how I survived, Emily said, her voice cutting through the noise. Explain how my cabin stayed warm. Explain how my baby lived. Explain how I did it without your firewood. Harold had no answer. Peter Strauss stood. I move that we dismiss all charges against Mrs. Andersson and recognize her sawdust brick method as a legitimate alternative fuel source. All in favor? 34 hands went up. Only Harold and his 2 timber associates abstained. The motion passed. Harold stormed out. The crowd erupted in conversation. People surrounded Emily, asking questions about the bricks, about Olaf's method, about how to make their own. She answered every question, shared every detail, held nothing back. Thomas Renner waited until the crowd thinned, then approached Emily with a contract already written. When spring comes, we partner. I provide the sawdust and pitch. You provide the knowledge. We make bricks for anyone who needs them. Charge enough to sustain the operation, but not so much that it becomes what we're fighting against. Fair? Emily read the contract. It was generous, more than fair. It gave her 20% of profits and guaranteed free bricks for widows and struggling families. Why are you doing this? Emily asked. Because I was wrong about you, and because my wife died from cold 5 years ago. If I can prevent that from happening to someone else, I will. Thomas extended his hand. Partners? Emily shook it. Partners. Walking back to her cabin through the snow, Emily felt something she hadn't felt since her husband died. Purpose. Not just survival, but meaning. Her struggle had created something larger than herself. But winter wasn't done testing her. On January 2nd, the temperature dropped to 48 below zero. Emily burned through all of Jonas's remaining firewood in 3 days trying to keep the cabin livable. When the wood ran out, she returned to the bricks. 25 per day, then 30. The cold was relentless, pressing in from every side. Sophia developed another fever on January 7th. Emily burned 40 bricks in a single day, keeping the cabin at 55 degrees, holding her daughter through the worst of it. Marta came with more herbs. The fever broke after 36 hours. Emily's brick supply dropped below 1,000. On January 15th, Jonas came with news that made Emily's heart stop. Ruth Palmer's cabin burned down last night. Emily grabbed the doorframe. Is she alive? She's alive. Baby's alive. But the cabin's gone. She was burning your bricks when a spark got through a crack in her stove. The whole place went up in 20 minutes. Emily felt the world tilt. Harold will use this. He'll say I killed her. He's already saying it. Called an emergency council meeting for tomorrow. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She held Sophia and stared at her own cracked stove and thought about fire spreading, about cabins burning, about children dying because she'd shared knowledge she thought was safe. The emergency meeting was smaller than the first. Just the council, the marshal, Harold, and Emily. Ruth Palmer was there too, her face exhausted but her eyes clear. Harold started immediately. Ruth Palmer's cabin burned because of Emily Andersson's dangerous advice. This is exactly what I warned would happen. Someone could have died. Marshal Cross turned to Ruth. Mrs. Palmer, what happened? Ruth stood, holding her baby. My stove had a crack I didn't know about. A spark escaped and caught some dry fabric. The fire spread before I could stop it. She looked at Harold, then at Emily. It wasn't the bricks that caused it. It was my stove. Emily told me to check for cracks. I missed one. That's my fault, not hers. The bricks made the fire hotter, Harold insisted, made it spread faster. The bricks kept my baby alive for 3 weeks, Ruth interrupted. Without them, we would have frozen. I lost my cabin, but my daughter is breathing and warm and alive. That's because of Emily's bricks. Peter Strauss leaned forward. Mr. Gunnarsson, you've opposed these bricks from the beginning, not because they're dangerous, but because they threaten your business. The council sees through it. We all do. Harold's face went dark. You're all going to regret this, when more cabins burn, when more people die. Remember that I warned you. He left. The council voted to continue supporting the brick method, with added safety requirements about stove inspection. After the meeting, Ruth approached Emily. I'm staying with Jonas and Marta until spring, but I wanted you to know something. Ruth's voice was steady. I'm going to rebuild, and when I do, I'm going to make more bricks, better ones, safer ones, because you showed me I don't have to be helpless. You showed me I can survive. Emily hugged her, feeling the shared weight of women who refuse to freeze quietly. January crawled into February. The temperature moderated slightly, rising to 0 on good days, dropping to 20 below on bad ones. Emily burned 20 bricks per day and kept the cabin at 45 degrees. Sophia grew stronger, started babbling, reached for things with her tiny hands. Emily's brick supply dropped below 500. On February 10th, she counted what remained. 406 bricks, 20 days of fuel. Spring was 43 days away. The mathematics had finally caught up with her. Emily sat with her ledger and wrote the truth. Not enough fuel. Will run out before spring. Must find alternative. She still had Marta's pig fat, 20 pounds. It would burn, but not hot. Maybe a week of minimal heat. After that, nothing. Emily had fought winter for 5 months. She'd survived temperatures that killed others. She'd created a method that would help people for years to come. But she was going to run out anyway. She fed Sophia, changed her, held her close. Then she put on every warm thing she owned and walked to Jonas's cabin. Jonas opened the door and saw her face. What do you need? Help? He didn't ask questions. He just grabbed his coat and followed her back to her cabin. Marta came too, bringing bread and coffee and the kind of presents that made hard things bearable. Emily showed them the numbers, the remaining bricks, the gap between fuel and spring, the certainty of running out. I fought so hard, Emily said, her voice breaking. I did everything right, and it's still not enough. Marta took her hand. You survived 5 months on fuel everyone said wouldn't work. That's not failure. That's victory. Victory means making it to spring. Victory means being alive right now, today, this moment. Marta squeezed her hand. You've already won, Emily. You just don't see it yet. Jonas cleared his throat. I have more firewood, half a cord. I was saving it for my own emergency, but you need it more. I can't take. You're not taking. I'm giving. There's a difference. Over the next week, 4 more families brought fuel. A cord of wood here, a pile of coal there, dried corn cobs, compressed peat, animal fat, scraps of lumber. Each family brought what they could spare, telling Emily the same thing. You showed us another way. This is us showing you that you're not alone. By February 20th, Emily had enough fuel to reach spring. Barely, but enough. On March 15th, the temperature rose above freezing for the first time in 6 months. Snow began to melt. The wind shifted from north to south. The sun felt warm on Emily's face when she stepped outside. Spring had come. Emily burned her last brick on March 22nd. She fed it into the stove and watched it catch fire, remembering the first brick she'd burned back in August. She'd been terrified then, alone, desperate. Now she was different, stronger, connected, proven. The brick burned for 45 minutes, then crumbled to ash. Emily cleaned the stove and let the fire die. She didn't need it anymore. The cabin was warm from sunlight. Sophia was crawling. The world was thawing. On April 1st, Thomas Renner arrived with a wagon full of sawdust and pitch and a crew of 6 men ready to learn how to make bricks. We're starting the operation, Thomas said. You ready to change how this valley survives winter? Emily looked at her cabin, at the stove that had carried her through, at Sophia playing on the floor. She thought about Olaf Mikkelsen and his strange wisdom, about Ruth Palmer rebuilding, about the families who'd brought fuel when she needed it most. I'm ready, Emily said. They made their first batch of bricks that week. 200 perfectly compressed, pitch-bound bricks that burned exactly like Olaf's. By May, they'd made 3,000. By June, 5,000. Word spread. Other valleys heard about the sawdust bricks. People came from 100 miles away to learn the method. Thomas's store became a brick factory. Emily became a teacher, showing desperate families how to make fuel from what everyone else threw away. Harold Gunnarsson's timber business collapsed by autumn. He left the valley in October, bitter and defeated. Nobody mourned his departure. That winter, not a single person in Bitter Creek Valley froze to death. The winter after that, none either. The bricks had changed everything. Years later, people would ask Emily how she'd survived that first winter. She'd tell them about Olaf's wisdom, about Marta's kindness, about Jonas's firewood, about Ruth's courage, about a community that chose to help instead of hinder. But the truth was simpler than that. Emily survived because she refused to accept that freezing was inevitable. She survived because she looked at something everyone dismissed as garbage and saw salvation. She survived because she was too stubborn to die quietly. And when spring came, when the snow melted and the world turned green and warm again, Emily Andersson stood in the doorway of her cabin with her daughter on her hip and knew something nobody could ever take from her. She had turned desperation into innovation, isolation into community, and certain death into defiant survival. The bricks had saved her life. But more than that, they'd proven something essential about human endurance. When you compress everything down to its most basic elements, need, knowledge, determination, You create something that burns hotter and longer than anyone thought possible. That's not just survival. That's transformation. And it doesn't end when winter does.